before we...
Could I share, Rebecca?
Kindly, go ahead.
I think one opportunity that we talked about was, we came back when schools closed in Kenya to schools where teachers did not come back. So there's a lot of teacher turnover. And one of opportunity, especially for us as big picture learning, is the role the school leaders play. So almost all of our school leaders came back. Very few teachers came back. So how can we empower those school leaders so that they can continue with the best practices to train teachers who are coming in, but also just to work with teachers collaboratively within their schools.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, you all. Well, we are...
Can I share too?
Sure, go ahead. Last one.
Could I share too?
Go ahead, yes.
Yeah, so my name is Julia Lubala, and I come from Shofco. So one opportunity is mentorship. Like how do we go about mentorship? So we started small. We have like experienced teacher mentoring maybe the incoming teachers or people who are joining the profession within an institution. Then from there, we could also have like internal trainings. So if you could create time as an institution and you figure out like what are some of the school needs, what are the teachers' needs, and then you just create a training, have time, and then do a training before you get to external trainings, maybe partnering with the government. That is my take.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And there's such, I think as we talk about collaboration, there's, Shofco does have a really wonderful model for mentorship and teacher development. So maybe you should, if you're open to talking to more people in this forum about that, or if Shofco would even like to welcome visitors, maybe put your, you could share more about that in the chat and even your email as well. Thank you all for participating in our experiment of pair shares, even as we're not in person. I'm going to hand it back over to Rose, who's going to introduce our panelists for the day. Over to you, Rose.
Sorry, could I just put in a quick word?
I would love for you to use the chat function, and we'd all love to read it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that, just taking us through that session. And I believe in your various groups, it was thought-provoking to just think, okay, what are the challenges and then what are the opportunities, which is very critical in terms of what we are discussing today. So I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Amazing people who are doing great things in the education space. And I'll first start with Ruth Mugambi, who is a technical advisor, Ministry of Education. Wow. Sorry, guys.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Or is it good evening or good afternoon, everyone?
Good afternoon. So Ruth is a Metis graduate from the 3rd cohort. She was a member of the Metis Fellowship and a Metis Reimagining Education Award winner for System Shaping in 2021. Currently, she's the technical advisor on CBC to the Principal Secretary, Ministry of Education, State Department for Implementation of the Curriculum Reforms. She previously worked at KICD as the Deputy Director in charge of Basic and Secondary Education, and also chaired the internal technical committee for the competency-based curriculum at KICD, what we know as CBC. And as a promoter of lifelong learning at Metis, she has concentrated on communities of practice for learning for teachers. That's her focus area. And this is being ingrained in policy documents to enable structures to be put in place for teachers to continuously learn and improve. So Ruth will be one of our panelists today. I'd also like to introduce Mercy Munialo, who's from Dignitas, and she's an education enthusiast with a passion to see real and rewarding education changes for children in Kenya. And she's an avid coach and teacher trainer at Dignitas and a proud alumni of Metis. And she definitely believes that this is a time to bring real change in the education space in Kenya. So that's Mercy Munialo, who will be part of the panel today. We also have a teacher in our midst, Dennis Omolo, who's the founder of the Teaching Pool. Dennis is a high school teacher of English and literature who is passionate about making Kenya's schools safe for learners and the wholesome professional development of teachers. So when he's not teaching, he runs, sorry? Okay, sorry. So when Dennis is not teaching, he runs the Teaching Pool, which is an organization that seeks to empower Kenyan teachers, especially those just joining the profession with the skills to reach their full potential. Yes. And then we have our final panelist, who is Carol Owala from Kenya Big Picture Learning. And she has been a teacher, a school leader, instructional and leadership coach, a manager of coaches. And now she leads Kenya Big Picture Learning, and which is a big picture learning project. Carol has extensive experience working with students, teachers, and school leaders in marginalized communities. And she lives in Nairobi with her husband and 3 sons, and a voracious reader, and believes in the potential of every child. So those are our panelists for today, with such amazing backgrounds and just experience that they're bringing to the table today to discuss. And this panel session will be moderated by Rebecca. So Rebecca, welcome, and take us through this. Karibu.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. Maybe we could also just at least, I think you were busy reading the flash their beautiful smiles, but welcome everybody. I think also then we can just go to the spotlight mode, Rose, to spotlight our panelists as they speak. Welcome again, Carol, Dennis, Ruth, and Mercy. It is wonderful to be together. I think as we first kick this off, my first question is, what skills and mindsets do you think our teachers most need to enable flourishing in classrooms? So what are the skills and mindsets most needed? Mercy, since I see you on my screen, I'll have you go first. Kindly, what do you think?
Thank you, Rebecca. First, allow me to appreciate the effort of all the teachers in Kenya. And to answer your question, Rebecca, having interacted and coached a lot of teachers from our work at Dignitas, I will say, just like learners, teachers need a growth mindset. And when we talk about a growth mindset, I appreciate that this is not something that can happen quickly. But then your question also touches around skills. And borrowing from one of us who already mentioned 21st century skills that teachers can have, such as lifelong learning, teachers' constant desire for creativity and imagination. I believe these, coupled with the growth mindset aspect, will bring a lot of vibrancy and schools to our learners sort of to thrive and succeed in the schools they are in. However, let me hear from Carol, if you want to chip in.
Thank you, Mercy. Thank you, Rebecca and Metis, for having me. I would love to agree with Mercy, but I also want to talk about something that we are seeing in our schools right now. We have to begin by acknowledging the big role that the teachers, that our teachers play. But we cannot assume the fact that our teachers are so stressed right now. In Kenya, we have 4 terms right now instead of 3 terms. Teachers are coming back to, they have now to support students who have been going through abuses. They're students whose parents have lost jobs. So our role in supporting teachers in their mental health, is needed now more than ever. So until we can be able to support teachers, with coping mechanism and tools and strategies to for them to, take care of themselves, I think the skills that we are talking about will not be possible even for them to use. So mental health will be a big one for me. And then I also love the fact that this reflection question is looking at both mindsets, because so many times we think about the skills. What skills do teachers need to be able to perform in class? I think mindsets is where the rubber meets the road, because it's mindset. If I have the right mindset, I'll be able to go to my class, wake up every day in the morning, go to my class when no one is watching and do the right thing. So some of the mindsets that I can talk about, I'll talk about one because of time, is, it comes from the concept of teaching pedagogy of confidence. Sometimes it's also called self-efficacy. As a teacher, do I see myself contributing towards something that's bigger than myself? How do I see my students? Do I see myself as a change agent? And then now when that condition is present, we can now talk about skills. And I'll give my colleagues an opportunity to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think most of the issues have been mentioned. So I'll just say that apart from the growth mindset, which most teachers have, I think, even the teachers who don't want to teach for the rest of their lives, I think it's a fundamental truth that every teacher wants to improve. There's no teacher you can tell that, okay, I can make you better. Will you take the option or not? And they say, no, I don't want to be a good teacher. They won't say that. So the growth mindset is just there, is there. I think we need to ignite it. But something bigger than the growth mindset is the environment where it thrives. Because a teacher could be so open-minded and motivated, but the environment can actually deflate them. So as we say that teachers are overwhelmed with the term and everything else, can our schools become better at nurturing the environment so that they feel safer, so that the burden of the 4 school terms, COVID, mental health issues actually felt less? Apart from that, I feel like one of the most important skills that teachers need to have, or we need to start talking about in Kenya, is how to connect with learners. For a very long time, we've always looked at learners as, I don't know, tools maybe for grades, people that we throw into the system and they give us grades. Most teachers say we produce 10 A's, we produce 20 A's and everything else. So the human side of the student is always lost. And I'm speaking about public schools mostly, because private schools and international schools, they are very big on doing a lot of connection, the human connection. So that one, I think, is something we need. And COVID has actually made the situation even more dire, because students are coming back with a lot of baggage. They had baggage before, but now the baggage is even heavier. So what do we need? We need to be more human, and that is something that we need to start doing with the teachers. As I conclude, this is going to be very difficult, because for a teacher like me, I've taught for 9 years, and I speak for many, many teachers who came into the profession with a mindset that we saw when we were growing up with other teachers. We have to do a lot of unlearning. We have to start saying that education should be fun, because for most of us, it was never fun. Our math class was full of games and everything else. So can we now unlearn some things and then relearn new things? Thank you very much.
Okay, I think for me, I would say that the teacher needs to think of their core assignment. When you say you're a teacher, what is your core assignment as a teacher? And the fact that they are talking about building children, building learners, let them know that this is a child who they have been given the responsibility to perform a task that the parent expects to see in their child. So I think the teacher really needs to understand their core assignment, and that is to build children. And the core issue, and we talk about education, because parents are taking their children to school to be educated. But what is education? So they need to understand the core meaning of that word of education, which is the acquisition of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values in order to change behavior towards a desired direction. So they need to understand that that is their core assignment, what is that what is that change of behavior you want to see in the learner? Learners learn from seeing and from hearing, and therefore the teacher becomes a role model. And therefore, the children watch, the children see, they listen, and it is from that that they learn. So the teacher needs to understand that. The teacher also needs to understand that all children are different, meaning they all learn differently. And because they are different, you should accept them and be compassionate. Even with that difference that they have, every child has the ability to learn, and every child can learn if you give them an opportunity to learn. So some of the things that I think a teacher should be very focused in, what is their core assignment as a teacher? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, really interesting. So it sounds like also people have different ideas of what is a core assignment of a teacher, and what would it look like if teachers also had space to think about what is my core assignment? How do I co-create my vision of my classroom? And consider, have the self-efficacy. Or Carol just said something I've never heard before, which is the pedagogy of confidence. That's really beautiful. Thank you so much for introducing that, Carol. How do we grow growth mindset? Thank you, Mercy, for those things. So I'm curious, we have a teacher here, we have someone in government, we have teacher trainers here as well. From your experience, panelists, what approaches have been successful in growing these skills and mindsets in your work? So now we've talked about what we're growing. How do we grow it? How do we grow those things? Feel free to go in any order. Go ahead, Mercy.
Yeah, let me jump on this. I think also because of the nature of my work, I'm a teacher educator and a coach. I've been a coach at Dignitas for quite a while now. I think 3 ideas come to mind on how to cultivate these skills and mindsets that we are already talking about. And the first that I think is very crucial is teacher training. And I'm glad that we already are having this conversation right now. And I believe that teachers need a refresher on skills. I think one of the panelists already mentioned that. A refresher on skills. Some of them are actually very new to us. As we deal with the different challenges that we have right now, they might not be the same as the challenges we had maybe some few years ago. So teacher training therefore becomes something that is very focal in the life of teachers. And this will actually help the teachers to relearn a few things and also help unlearn, if I may borrow from what Dennis already shared, some of the skills that maybe they had acquired over time. Allow me to also just touch on the approach around coaching. Now, obviously, because I'm a coach and I see the immense benefits therein around coaching, I do believe that this is something that can really be used to sort of grow skills around mindsets of teachers as they continue, supporting the learners. So coaching, when I look at this, helps bring an opportunity to the teacher to think about their own work, to really think about what is my role, as Ruth already shared. What is my role as a teacher? Am I looking at myself as an instructor who just sits in class, probably handles classwork, or am I a mentor to these learners? How do I improve on my mentorship skills? How do I improve on my pedagogical practices? How do I make my classes to be learner-centered and child-friendly? So coaching therefore becomes something that is very pivotal when you're talking about cultivating growth mindsets on building teachers around the 21st century skills. I had 3 ideas, but let me give an opportunity to another panelist, and I'll drop the last in the chat.
I would love to rejoin the conversation, since I totally agree and can relate with what Mercy says about training and the role coaching and training teachers play even as we think about, ways to make our teachers thrive. I would love to push the idea that even as we train and coach, we need to honor our teachers' experiences as adult learners. Teachers' learning experiences, the way teachers learn is very different from the way students learn. And as teachers, trainers, or people who have been tasked with the responsibility to, work with the teachers, we have to know that. And that is where we have to start. So I would share one experience, one belief around how adults learn. Teachers or adults, they need to be involved. So if you're training teachers, or you're designing maybe a coaching experience, you have to involve the teachers. I think that is just really, really key. And then, so involving teachers, and again, I think it will be very helpful if you are very practical. What does involving teachers look like? It means you will, if you're training teachers, because you want them to be practical, and I think we are moving from lecturing to being practical, you have to, model that practice, even as you train, that is really, really important. And then the other thing is you also have to give them, when you respect teachers as adult learners, you won't lecture them and tell them what to do. In this country, as teachers, I've been a teacher in this system, and we've been told so many times what to do. This is the time where we stop telling teachers what coaching.
Carol, I think we might be losing you. Dennis or Ruth, if you want to pick up. So maybe I'll go to Dennis, because Dennis is currently a classroom teacher. Do you relate to what she's saying about being told what to do? And what is the antidote to that? So if we have people in the crowd here who are training teachers, what's a meaningful way to be involved in a way that it doesn't create more work, more burden on you? Because we also talked about time. Do you have a perspective on that?
Okay, yeah. So let me start by saying that for a long time, teachers have been told what to do. And I'm very sorry to say this. I'm going to say it in the most, the safest way possible. But most of the communication that comes from the top, they're always warnings. And you see that one puts the teachers at a very bad situation. So as Carol says, we need to give teachers, I think the antidote will be to give teachers a choice. I mean, so professional development would be in a way that you're told, okay, so there are 7 areas you can improve on. Then these are the centers, or let me say, how can I put it? These are the providers of that kind of knowledge. So when would you want to do it? At your own pace? Because what has happened now is you've been told you have to do this module by this time, and you have to do it whether you want it or not. So that is number one, the choice. Number two, we need to localize training, because different schools in Kenya, I mean, you take 2 schools in Kenya, they're going through 2 different experiences. What you would prioritize for a school in Nairobi would be different for teachers in a school in, let's say, Turkana, so we need to really localize the teacher professional development to serve the needs of the community that is focused on, that we are focusing on. And one of the most important ways of doing this is through doing our needs assessment. So we just don't come and say that, okay, teachers, this is what we're going to learn. No, we first go and say, what is the most important skill or mindset that these teachers in this locality that they need? So that one I think would help. And for the young teachers teaching now, there are so many opportunities online and things like that. So I think one of the ways, a strategy that has helped, especially with the teaching pool and our WhatsApp group, is just pointing teachers towards where the professional development can be found. An example, the Microsoft Educator Network that is doing a wonderful job in disseminating knowledge and skills and everything else. So also pointing teachers towards the right direction has always worked. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dennis. So it's interesting, if we want to build a sense of agency, then we have to also offer choice and a space for self-reflection of like, where are my learning edges? Is it in positive classroom culture or behavior management? Is it in teaching math skills? Is it in, caregiver engagement? I wonder if you have thoughts on this, Ruth.
Yes, I think one of my pet areas in this area is the communities of practice, where teachers actually need to get together and share experiences, share challenges, share lesson plans, and share what they have done so that they can be able to help one another in terms of improving their teaching practice, especially where they have tried something, they have tried some methodologies, it doesn't seem to be working in their class, so they share with another teacher who gives them another idea. I think teachers are encouraged to be innovative. If you look at the basic education framework, teachers are not specifically told what to do in a classroom situation. They're given opportunities to be innovative, to use the context in which they are to enable children to learn, because children can learn a concept using different ways and yet to still achieve the learning outcome that you want to do. Indeed, there are certain things that teachers will be told this has to be done this way, and especially when we talk about policy formulations. So policies have to be implemented as they are. You cannot give it, this policy is for this and not, it has to be the same, and it has to be done the same way. I think when it comes to the competency-based curriculum, I think if you look at the designs and you follow them, you'll be able to see that teachers are encouraged to contextualize their teaching and not to pretend they are teaching a child in Nairobi or even in Nairobi Westlands when they're in a slum area. The context is completely different, and therefore the teachers are encouraged to be innovative to teach their context. And that is why we are talking about the differentiated learning, where teachers are supposed to differentiate their approaches to teaching in regards to the kind of learners that they have. So I want to agree with Mercy that training and coaching is a very important, and I want to build, training is obvious, and not just training today and then you train after 5 years. It's supposed to be continuous training. Every 2 years, one needs to have a refresher course because our life is so dynamic and things are changing. But I would like to build on the issues of coaching that she has talked about, because a lot of teachers come from teacher training colleges when they are trained in all methods of pedagogy, even learner-centered approaches, which CBC is all about. But when they go into a school setup, it is the practice in the schools that changes them. A teacher comes with a lot of energy to do practical work, and then they see nobody is doing it, so why should I do it? So it is not so much the training, but it is more so the practice in the schools that makes the teacher change their methods. And that is why I think I agree with Mercy so much that apart from the communities of practice, the coaches who are coaching the teachers in school, are the coaches encouraging the learner-centered practices that are happening, or what are they practicing? So the training of the coaches and to institutionalize coaching in the school system, I think, can be a very important aspect, as well as development of communities of practice within the system.
Yeah, Dennis, you have a reaction. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to just remembered something. So one of the approaches that has always worked very well is that where we can have schools adopting other schools, because we know that there are schools that have a more robust teacher professional development program. I've seen that with Regis, the one that Cliff heads. They go to the primary school that I think that is next door, and they do something with the learners there. So I think this approach of knowing which schools are doing something different and also tapping into that, the thing that they are doing, can also really work wonders for us.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we've heard there are different types of supporting teachers to be on this path of continuous development and building that self-reflection. So there's teacher training, We've heard of professional learning communities, which is having peer groups of teachers be able to really share, and then coaching, which is a bit more kind of an individualized approach. And I'm sure Mercy could speak more what makes good coaching or what makes poor coaching, and well, everyone could as well. But they're really different ways. I think that's really, really important to note. I'm really interested in this concept of monitoring and measuring growth. Is that important? We've heard from people saying, beginning of the session, it's such a challenge because I feel like there's so much development I could be doing. I don't even know where to start. What have you found useful for tracking and supporting monitoring of growth? Carol, welcome back. Maybe I'll tag you for that one. How do you monitor and measure growth?
Hi everyone, I'm sorry. I had issues with my internet connection, but I'm back. I think I would just build on what I mentioned when we were beginning this conversation, which is even as we think about how we want to measure teachers' growth, that brings the aspect of assessment, evaluation. We have to do it from a point of trust. The teacher has to be involved. So, there are quite a number of ways we can monitor teachers' growth. But, is the teacher on board? Because otherwise it's just, what has been happening traditionally, where teachers feel like, their work is not appreciated. People are constantly coming to their class to fault find and, see things that they are not doing very well. So things that have worked for us at Big Picture Learning is from the onset, come up with guidelines together with the teachers. So if we are monitoring your growth, I think one of my colleagues said, we have to first of all define what that looks like and involve the teacher from the onset. Really, really worked for me as a coach is in engaging the teacher in a reflective practice. Guess what? After some time of working with this teacher, you're gonna go your way. Whether you're working for an organization, whether you're the head teacher, this teacher is going to be expected to teach when you're not seeing. So I think involving teachers in reflective practice is one way of telling them, look, we honor you and we really value your experience, but we also really trust you to be able to reflect about your own practice, what you're doing very well, what your challenges are, and even ways you could improve, how you're teaching when you come to your class the next day. I think that is something that we need to think about. Other ways are through classroom observations. I've had my colleagues talking about, coaching. A 20-minute coaching session can make a very big difference if it's done well. And we can actually get a lot from that. So it's really on time. And then the teacher also, like I said, if it's done well, the teacher feels like they have a critical friend who is helping them in their growth. I'll talk again about the reflective practice. When we are thinking about the sustainability of our coaching, when we are still thinking about the sustainability of the best practices that we are introducing in our classes with our teachers, then reflective practice plays a very big role. If I'm able to reflect on my practice as a teacher, I'll be very open to reflecting on my practice with a colleague. I'll be very open to reflecting on my practice with my principal. It all has to begin with me and whether I feel confident and trusted enough to be able to reflect on my practice. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Mercy. Yeah. Thank you so much, Carol.
Just to build on what Carol has shared, and I like what Carol is sharing about reflective practice and also use of assessments and evaluation, which can be very handy tools in measuring growth. I think one thing that we have also used, which is almost in line to what Carol has mentioned, is looking at what the teacher ideally chooses to use as the best practices, maybe for positive behavior management, or when the teacher is teaching. So when we look at measuring our gains or our impacts in the schools that we teach, we ultimately are looking at what are some of the observable skills that teachers will now pick and choose to use as a result of the new knowledge and skills that they have been receiving through coaching and feedback. Another way that we usually look at these is at the learner's gains or the impact on the learner's perspective. Now, also borrowing from assessment and evaluation, which is a big piece when it comes to formative assessment, be it in the competency-based curriculum, be it in the all curriculum. I think for us, especially at Dignitas, what we do mostly is we look at how our learners are performing once our teachers have been, let's say, under a program. I will look at how our learners are goal-oriented, or are they self-starters? Are they portraying aspects of self-efficacy, so to speak? We also look at other behaviors in learners, such as how are they participating and driving their own learning? So aspects of imagination and creativity, and also learning to learn come in. And these are things that we can really just observe. And we do this by gathering notes using, of course, just data tools. And of course, another aspect that we look at is how are the learners now in terms of the curiosity? Can we compare the learners in our schools, the ones that are going through our program, together with the learners who are not really on our program? So we hope to find that our learners who are going through our program, or the teachers whose learners have gone through the program, will portray a lot of learner curiosity. They'll be more effective at communicating and collaboration. So really basically just quantitative ways of working through our monitoring and evaluation. That's what we look for, but I'm happy to hear from Dennis.
Thank you very much for the teaching pool. Sorry, we are yet to do a very formal framework for evaluation. So this has been also an eye-opening kind of conversation in terms of evaluation, as I listen to those who've been there and what you've been doing. But we've done it very informally, because we ask the teachers, evaluation depends on what you're actually evaluating. Are we evaluating, let's say, classroom participation, for example? How many learners come to you to talk to you about their problems in terms of mental health issues? So a reflection for the teacher, that is number two, keeping records on whatever aspect of teaching that we're trying to improve. Classroom observation, we do this a lot, especially when I teach. You can just tell a colleague, come to my class, and then give me feedback. So I've learned a lot, but we've had so many success stories after sharing in our WhatsApp groups about maybe approaches towards making kids participate, classroom participation strategies and things like that. After sometimes teachers come to us and say that I used to give assignments and then I get only 10 books out of the 30. The other 20, I have to fight for them to bring their assignment. But now after a year, they're always brought even before I ask for them. Actually, kids doing homework and then bringing before you ask for the book. So such kind of evidences, pieces of evidence can go a long way in helping us monitor the growth of a teacher. Thank you.
Okay, really interesting. So we're hearing that kind of ties on. So for those of you who don't know, Dennis is the teaching pole is kind of like a virtual community of learning that is teacher-led. So that kind of ties also with what Carol was saying, was just about this role of evaluation and monitoring in the context of trust or teacher buy-in and consent. It's really interesting. Ruth, how do you think about this at scale? Because we're hearing this of, the really importance of having teachers monitor their own growth. Mercy talked about looking for proof of teacher growth and development at the student level, and not just by typical academics, by their curiosity, by their participation, etc. How are you and how is the Ministry of Education thinking about this?
Okay, yeah, it's I think monitoring and evaluation is a very key area in terms of understanding what to do and what to change, especially when it comes to curriculum development, development of teacher training programs. Even when we talk about CBD, it has to be evidence-based. So you'll find that a lot of monitoring and evaluation takes place within the curriculum. But for us, within the education sector, because when we talk about the tenets of education, it's more than just curriculum. There's a teacher training, there's materials, there's more to it than just that. But I think for me, I'll talk about it more at a national level in terms of understanding. And for us, we measure learning outcomes because the focus of education is the achievement of learning outcomes. So if we are saying that children should be able to read by this age, they should be able to do this by this age. So that is what we measure to understand whether it is actually happening. And I think that is what Carol and Mercy are talking about, assessment and tests. So we do, KICD does those, sorry, not KICD, NEC, the Examination Council does those random assessments in grade 3, grade 6, and Form 2. So as to see whether they're achieving the learning outcomes in sample schools nationally. And what this helps us to do is, one, are they achieving the learning outcomes? Two, if not, what is the problem? Sometimes it may not be the teacher, it may be the learning resources, it may be the school policies, it may be just other things happening. Like you find, like now there's drought. If you go and do the assessment in a place with drought, that might be the cause. So it's just to evidence-based in terms of understanding what has caused the learner not to achieve the learning assessment. But if you look at, so that is done every year. And like now when we're talking about grade 3, it's actually a national assessment that happens for us to understand where are we at. And if you look at the assessment that is being currently done now, it's actually in numeracy and language, because the focus of up to grade 3 is literacy and numeracy. So we want to ask ourselves, where are we in terms of this? And then also to understand which counties are doing better or which sub-counties are doing better and which ones are not, and what are the interventions that one can do in order to improve that. But even when we talk about CBC, it is encouraging reflective practice. If you look at the current lesson plan, the very last part there, on every lesson, teachers are being encouraged to reflect on their lesson. And mainly is to ask 3 questions. 1, what went well in my lessons? And what went badly? And what can I do differently? Just those 3 questions, reflective practice, so that after every lesson, I know this will take time because change is a very difficult thing, but we're asking teachers, reflect, think about your lesson. Because as I was saying, your core mandate is to ensure that children are learning, because you're a facilitator of learning. But the other thing we'd like to encourage is also peer assessment. Within the teachers, I'm a teacher in 1A, another is in 1B, another is 1B. Why can't we come together and assess ourselves in how we are doing in terms of teacher performance? And that therefore needs to have a culture of having support groups, and that is why the communities of practice becomes a very important factor for teachers to be able to actually assess their performance, because eventually the assessment of the performance of the teacher will be pegged on the performance of the learner, how well the learner is learning. I think that is why we assess. But if you look at when we do formative assessments, which are done maybe after every cycle or whatever, you find that even teachers are given an opportunity to answer those questionnaires, to give the challenges they are facing, so that one can also see that probably we put a lot of blame on teachers, yet they themselves are going through a lot of other experiences which are not, we don't take into consideration when we are doing some of these assessments. Yeah, so I think I can talk that from the national level.
Yeah, thank you so much for that,
Ruth.
Ruth. Do we have, so we've talked a lot about, okay, assessing students because our ultimate impact should be on their learning. I wonder, as I open the floor also for others to ask questions, which I hope you're writing in the chat, I wonder, Ruth, just quickly, do we have a sense as a nation, what are the core competencies and skills of a teacher? We want them to have growth mindset. We want them to be able to assess and monitor learnings. We want them to build relationships with caregivers. Do we have like a set tool for that? Or is that something that ministry is open for collaboration, maybe from organizations here?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. There's actually a teacher education curriculum framework that spells out the core competencies of a teacher, but you'll find that they are very similar to those of the core competencies of the learner, except with the teacher, there's more in terms of they're expected to carry out action research. And that is one of the core things. Action research helps you to understand the core issues within your school and not necessarily, and within your learner, and not necessarily borrow issues from outside. So if you look at what they're expected to do now, especially under the new dispensation, is they're supposed to carry out the action research for themselves to improve their skills in terms of being able to assess learners. There's also expected, apart from research, there's reflective learning, and then there's the issue of modeling in terms of who they are as teachers. And also, so you find that the teacher education curriculum framework really spells out the kind of teacher that we expect to see now in the classroom. And this has been developed by KICD. So there is that aspect. And if you look at the teacher education curriculum that is now coming, you've seen the recommendation, which was from as far back as 2015, that the teachers should be upgraded to be diploma teacher. That is the lowest teacher that is expected in the classroom. You find that even that curriculum has actually been upgraded so that to ensure that the kind of teacher that we are churning out will be able to be equipped with some of this. And also for those in service, I think there's now a 9-month course that one can go through to upgrade themselves to become a diploma teacher, but also acquire the same competencies that you were talking about. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Ruth. I'm seeing some great questions come through for you all. All right, our first one is from Doris. Hi, Doris. Do you want to come off mute and just ask in your own words your question? Okay, if Doris is feeling shy, I can also read it. So she asks, could you share a sample tool you would use to measure growth in the teachers you're coaching or mentoring? Actually, that's an easy one. Yeah. Is that a tool? Do you all have tools that could maybe be emailed out to participants?
I can share later one that I've used with my teachers before. It's the teacher self-assessment tool. I can share that with you later, Rebecca.
Okay, great. Perfect. And if Dignitas has anything they want to share as well, or the framework, we have your emails, I think, from sign up. So we'll be happy to share that, and you can adapt it or adopt it to your context. A next question. How about, okay, we have this as well. How do you go about teachers who are stagnant and never show growth? Who wants to take that on?
Yeah, so we would have to ask what growth we're talking about. The issue I've always had with the Kenyan situation when it comes to measuring how much growth a teacher is actually showing is because the sense of a teacher, the worth of a teacher is always measured in grades, I'm sorry to say. So we don't always talk about the process. So if this year I got a mean grade of A in English and next year I get a B with my students, for some people that will be seen as me not growing. I've actually retrogressed. But you see, there are just too many variables in education, and we never take care of these variables. So it would be to answer that question, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of growth are we looking at? Are we looking at grades? Are we looking at the way a teacher makes a class lively or something like that? So I think I want to throw that back and ask what kind of growth, because the teacher could be growing, but you're not seeing that in terms of grades. Thank you.
Yeah. So I know we talked a lot about sometimes there's skill gaps, sometimes there are will gaps, sometimes there are knowledge gaps, sometimes there are emotional intelligence gaps. What do you do though when you feel like even, okay, point taken about sometimes there could be growth, but it's not in the grades. What if we're not seeing anything in terms of child participation, anything? What have you all found with a teacher that's been more difficult? And maybe you think it's not a will gap, but you think, you know, or maybe it is. I don't know. What do you, Mercy, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, Rebecca, when I think about this question, and this is something that we usually get in school. Sometimes you might get a teacher who has almost or portrays all sorts of gaps. Could be knowledge gap, skill gap, you know, will gap. I think as a coach, the first thing you'll want to do is, as Dennis has mentioned, find out where is the teacher struggling from. But then there is always something that you can use, and we call it asset-based coaching. Now, asset-based coaching comes from a point of where you see or you celebrate some of the things that the teacher is doing well so far. Now, sometimes if it is a will gap, then you realize that these will help push this teacher to see what is working and not really focus on what is not working. And then from there onwards, now you can start designing a support plan to this particular teacher in such a way that you don't give, or maybe you don't set for the teacher, or you allow the teacher to set very little bit by bit actionable points to work on. And as the teacher slowly overcomes the will gap, or maybe the capacity gap that he or she has, with time, you realize that this particular teacher will start, you know, making tremendous strides. Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Mercy. All right, we have another question from Roslyn, who's asking, we talked a little bit about differentiation before, and she's specifically bringing up learners with epilepsy. In your experience, how have you been able to support teachers to be able to differentiate with students with various different social, emotional, and physical and medical needs as well? That one from Roslyn.
Could I respond?
Yeah, Carol, please.
So this is a challenge that so many teachers, in my experience, struggle with. Right now, as we think about the inclusive education, teachers are grappling with how do we, you know, the fact that, you know, so many students are coming in that have different categories of special needs, including, you know, mental challenges and, you know, epilepsy, which, you know, she's talking about. So the biggest question is, how do I, you know, meet the needs of all my learners? I have students in my class who are learning very fast. I have students in my class who are taking a bit of time. And then I also have students who have all these challenges that they're coming in with. I think this is an area that I've supported teachers in for a number of years. I always encourage my teachers to look for support before we can work with these students effectively. There are a number of support, even in this country, that teachers can tap into. So the things that I've noted is we have quite a number of students with different challenges and special needs that have not been diagnosed. And so as a teacher, you have this child and you know, again, there's a gap in how we are trained as teachers to support these learners effectively. So one of the things that we've done is to work with special needs service providers, and I'll share very quickly. If you have a child who has, you know, challenges that, you know, you cannot explain, you can send them to KISE. they do educational assessment. The good thing with educational assessment is you're given a report about the diagnosis of that child and even ways that you can use in your own class to support these learners. And then, when that happens, then as a teacher, now you have the power and you have the knowledge on how to go about even differentiating instruction or using strategies that will support this, will make learning possible for these students.
Yeah, maybe I can add on to what Carol has said, which is correct, that there are many children. In fact, they say the variety of learners with special needs are numerous, and sometimes it's difficult. It's actually individualized in some cases. So if you look at when we look at the CBC, the vision is actually cater for every learner, nurturing every learner's potential, meaning that we must ensure that every child learns and every child can learn. And she's talked about KISE, which is correct. KISE does the assessment, and KISE stands for Kenya Institute of Special Education. And we also have what we call the EAC centers that are in every county. So that the KISE is, unfortunately, it's only in Nairobi. But in every county, in every sub-county, we have what we call EAC centers. These are education assessment centers that the child can be taken in to be assessed in terms of the challenge the child has, and therefore they'll be given recommendation on what kind of curriculum or what kind of school that child should be taken to. And because of this new challenge, you find that even in the new teacher education curriculum, every teacher who is being trained has to do a course in special needs so that they are able to start identifying learners with special needs, so that they can be able to see a child that has any challenges and be able to advise a parent to take them to these assessment centers for their child to be assessed and to be appropriately placed, as opposed to a child struggling in a school where they do not belong. When it comes to epilepsy, I think the child can still learn in a regular school. I think the problem is the challenge would be when the child becomes sick in a class and things like that. So that is why the teacher education training, and probably even when we talk about in-service training, they should also be able to look out for such learners, because they should not be excluded from learning because of any special needs that they have. They should be part of the school community, and the school community should be sensitized on how they can appropriately support that kind of a child within the environment. But the only way that this can be done, because head teachers and teachers may not know, is once they contact the EAC centers, and the EAC centers can be able to come and help them in terms of training and giving them the support they need to support the child to learn.
Beautiful. Kindly allow me to add on what Carol has said. I had a challenge because most of parents, they are really in denial that their children are special. So I made an enmity with one of my parents when I gave out the list, because I could see that the child is struggling and she has a special need, and she really refused. And that was the end of that child coming to our school. So we need to sensitize these parents even before, and they should accept that these children, they need special need. Thank you.
Wow. Just to add, Rebecca, before you talk, I just wanted to add to what everyone has said, that for a long time, teachers like us were not equipped with the knowledge and the skills to diagnose some of these situations, especially for those so-called unseen disabilities like autism, the range, the spectrum itself. It only took me, I think 2 years ago is when I first met someone who told me, Mwalimu, I'm autistic. Did you know that? So you can imagine. So for all these years, I think I've dealt with kids. We used to wonder what was wrong with some kids, but now we know that we can do better. And I'm very glad to hear that there are frameworks in place, and I can't wait to explore everything that has been fronted. Thank you.
Yeah. There is, okay, we are approaching the end with 9 minutes left. So panelists, I'm also encouraging you, kindly feel free to answer some of the questions that have appeared in the chat. Okay, I think this is interesting. So it's about CBC implementation. Are teachers adequately prepared? And then on that, someone else had said, I've been a part of trainings that have been essentially slides running. So a lot of telling instead of showing. So I guess this is for you, Ruth, but then everyone, how, given the CBC is meant to be about competencies and very experiential, how are we doing in terms of preparing our teachers to lead in that experiential way? And what are opportunities for improving that? Ruth, and then anyone else.
Okay, thank you. Indeed, the questions have arisen in terms of the adequacy and the effectiveness of the teacher training. When you have the kind of numbers that we are talking about, indeed, it would be hard. And also to say that the focus of CBC, of the competency-based curriculum, is learner-centered approaches. When we talk about experiential learning, we talk about inquiry-based learning, we talk about practicals, we talk about research. These were actually taught in college. And teachers actually have the basic foundation. Even the current teacher training curriculum that was there even 10 years ago, these approaches were actually taught. But what happens is that once you go to school, the practice is different. So people just go into the practice and stop using those learner-centered approaches. So even as we are training, it's not that we are training, the training is new in terms of the pedagogy. It's just like a refresher course. You guys, you are taught how to do practicals. You guys, you are taught how to take children out for field trips. This is what CBC is encouraging you to do. So it's more of changing the mindsets for teachers to perform differently on what they already know. Obviously, there are those who are much older and left school like 30 years ago. And that is why the training becomes maybe more necessary, but it's actually about changing the mindset to do things a little different from what you were taught in college. When we have the trainings, indeed, when you have 5 days to train, it's probably not enough. And when you have over 50 teachers in a session, some run up to 70. And for a proper CBC training, we say a minimum of 25, 30 would be great. But when they're large, you know what happens. And also when we talk about the trickle-down effect that KICD officers train trainers of trainers who train teachers, you know what happens with the cascade mode of training, that it actually dilutes as it goes down. So what we are encouraging is more of continuous training, more of communities of practice, and more of online discussions. So if you look at the KICD website, there's a program called Elimika program, targeting teachers only, to continuously refresh them in terms of how to teach, because and to continuously teach to continuously learn on how to implement the CBC. So in everything, there'll always be teachers who embrace it 100%. There are those teachers who will know how to do it 100%, and there are those who will not. I also want to say that the training of CBC was focused because we are using the facing in, facing out strategy in terms of facing in CBC as we face out the 844. So the training has always been focusing on the next class. Like now, when we come to March, the focus will be on the next class, isn't it? Which is grade 6 and grade 7. So you go to the next. So there's a bunch of like 6 years teachers in secondary schools who have never had an opportunity to be trained, because it is not yet, CBC is not yet arriving at secondary school at that time. Because what happens is that if you decide to train anybody who is available, then you'll miss out. You'll get people who are trained continuously, and you'll miss out on those who have never been trained. So the focus is on the next class. Once you finish with the next class, then you train the next class until the 5 years, the 12 years are done. So we know there's a large cohort of teachers out there who have never had an opportunity to be trained. And I know there are those who are eager to be trained, but they have been left out because they are teaching in grade 7, 6, 7, 8, and 9 and above. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the time now, and we actually need to wrap up this session. I know we could go on forever. I think as your moderator, I'll take the opportunity to say what I'm noticing here is that there are still gaps. Just as we want teachers to continuously improve, us as leaders and the system as a whole, our government institutions, as well as the civil society organizations and companies that support all learners in this country, we need to also be continuously improving, and that we might not be there right yet, but that there's a role that each of us, I think, at any given point in this room, we had 70 people there. There's a role for each of us to play in supporting teachers and supporting learners, and that even as at an institutional and government level, there are processes undergoing, there's plenty of room for the Dignitases and the Kenya Big Picture Learnings and the teaching pools and whatever you are running, to be able to contribute to this shared goal of ensuring that all teachers have what they need. So thank you for being here, for being a part of this discussion. Our panelists will be in touch with responding maybe to some of the last questions that they couldn't get. There were some resources that were promised, and we will be able to share those out with each of you, as well as the resources, as well as their emails and LinkedIn's, should you wish to reach out to them farther. And yes, Ron is asking, do you get the recording? Yes, we will give you the recording. I will now pass it back to Rose to kind of share our next steps, including an exciting opportunity that's coming up for future events. But before I do so, will you join me? Yes, Joseph is giving some claps to our panelists. They did a wonderful job. Put it in the chat box. You can wave like me if your video is on, but thank you, Carol, Dennis, Ruth, and Mercy. We're so grateful. Back to you, Rose.
Yeah, thank you so much, our panelists, for that very insightful discussion, and even for answering the questions so ably. We've definitely, each of us, I'm sure you've discovered where your place is in making a change, what you need to do on an individual level or in your organization, so that you can see changes in teacher development. So that's really amazing. As Rebecca has mentioned, we will share some resources with you on email. And so look out for that as well. You can also feel free to subscribe to our newsletter. We usually send a newsletter regularly, so sign up for that as well from our website. So in terms of our next steps, we'll have another session just like this one on 10th of March. Please mark your calendars. It will be tackling topic around ECD and foundational skills. So we'll be delving deeper into discussing that ECD and foundational skills. That's on 10th of March. So look out for that as well in your emails in terms of like how to sort of express interest in attending that. And then we will have our fellowship application open on 1st of March. Yay! I was a cohort 2 fellow, and I had a really interesting, time of learning in terms of how to innovate in this education space. And so look out for that. When it opens, apply, refer people that you've seen who are doing great innovations in education, refer them to apply as well. And the application period will be between 1st of March this year, 2022, and 2nd of April is when the application will receiving application will close. Finally, join our Facebook community, which is at Metis Collective. And we'll see you in, the emails, the discussions. I'm sure you've made a few friends during the breakout sessions. And thank you so much for being part of this discussion in the last 1.5 hours. Yeah, we look forward to seeing you in the next event. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you so much, everyone. You did great on time. Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful discussion. We'll be in touch for the next one. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening.